Hello and welcome to All You Can Board. I am Carlo, and today we are doing episode 5 of my series called Curating My Collection. So it's been a little while since I've done one of these. The last one was, I believe, back in June of 2022, so about 8 months ago. Now this is a series where I look at basically games that are leaving my collection for one reason or another. I talk about why they're leaving my collection, sort of how long they've been in there, maybe comparable games that are sticking in the collection and that sort of thing. If what you're looking for is just the actual discussion about the games and why they're leaving, you can use the timestamps below. I will still do this similar to the way that I've done the previous videos in this series, but I also did want to take some time at the beginning here. It's probably going to be about half the video at the start, just talking about some other aspect of curating my collection. I thought about doing it as its own standalone video, but figured it really belonged here because these are the videos where I'm talking about getting rid of my games in my collection, actually talking about my collection somewhat in depth. So the big thing for me this year is that in 2023, I am putting a freeze on my personal collection. So I'm doing a sort of no-buy challenge for the entire year, calendar year of 2023. So I'm going to be, you can use the timestamps below as well because I'm splitting these up into kind of some discussion points leading up to actually talking about the games I'm getting rid of again. Just because there's a few things that have factored in. You know, you're probably wondering why I've decided to do this, what kind of like rules or guidelines or whatever that I'm imposing on myself and that sort of thing. So let's get into it. So first off, why am I doing this is to mainly just get caught up on my list of unplayed games that are sitting on my shelf. I'm not a huge fan of the term shelf of shame because I wouldn't say I feel shame by seeing them sit there, especially, you know, we also have to take into account the fact that there's, you know, the pandemic over the last few years is a big reason for not only myself, I'm sure a lot of people to have, you know, have a growing collection of unplayed games. Obviously, there was a big stretch there where it was pretty tough or near impossible to be playing anything other than online or whatnot. Anyways, this video isn't to get into, you know, gaming related to the pandemic necessarily. But not only with that, but the fact that we started a YouTube channel, you know, a few years ago. So, you know, we're buying games, but we're also getting in review copies from publishers or things that one of us might have backed on Kickstarter, or we're meeting up with someone who has some new game that they want to play. So part of this is that we're not, you know, I'm not getting to my unplayed games that I've bought, some of which have been sitting there for 2-3 years, some even more. I'm also not getting to revisit my favorite games anymore. So, you know, I started gaming, like the sort of hobby gaming aspect was probably about 15 years ago or so for me. And for those first 5 to 7 years, 5 to 8 years or so, I played pretty much the same 5 or 10 games, like exclusively. It was, you know, Carcassonne, Catan, Agricola, Pandemic, Ticket to Ride, Seven Wonders, Alhambra, like Love Letter, maybe a couple with Small World, maybe 1 or 2 other games. Like I basically played those same games for like a decade almost, but played a lot of those 50, 100 plus times. You know, Kingdom Builder is another one. But then I got to a point where I started asking myself, like, what else is out there? I would try one new game and think, oh, this game's been out for 4 years. How come I haven't tried this? And I started realizing, yeah, I have my favorites, but maybe I can kind of put those on hold for a bit and start kind of exploring, going to more of a discovery phase in this hobby and see what else is out there, because I don't want to find out in 20 years that there's some game that's been out released for my whole life that I just spent all these years not playing. So let's spend some time discovering. And then, so I've kind of switched from depth to breadth to expand, you know, my range of games I've played over the past few years. But I keep looking back at my shelf and realizing it's not only the unplayed games, but my favorites I don't get to revisit. And I kind of want to get back to that. I want to get back to playing certain games over and over and over and getting deeper into specific games and, you know, getting into the nitty gritty, not only for my own personal enjoyment, but also for content that we might want to do for the channel. You know, some of these games that I've played hundreds of times, whatever, Agricola, Race for the Galaxy, Carcassonne, I might start doing some, you know, videos that focus more specifically on those games and whatnot. So it's all just part of a play the games you love more, or the games you haven't tried yet more, rather than just like, you know, keeping up with what we feel is important for the channel, or to be able to. This leads into the next point I'll say right now, is this kind of ties into like FOMO, like fear of missing out, for anyone who doesn't know what it stands for, and hype and all that. But I think I'm pretty good at resisting like the FOMO or hype of a game in terms of like you need to buy it right this second or own it forever. And for me, I've spoken about this in previous episodes about how a lot of the games I buy knowing in advance that it's sort of a rental. Like, hey, I know enough about this game to know it's not going to be something that lives in my collection forever, but I really want to try it out, and I don't know anyone else who has the game, and I know it's popular enough that I could probably play it for a few months or whatever, and then get rid of it, and maybe I lose 10 or 15 bucks, and I think of that as a rental fee and whatnot. But even then, you know, you're buying a lot of games that you think, well, this might not even live in my collection long term. So I kind of felt this feeling of like, well, I have to be in on the discussion as a content creator. I have to be aware of these games, like these popular games that everyone's talking about. Like, I would kind of feel this self-imposed pressure of like, what kind of content creator would I be if I don't have an opinion on this game or on this game? But again, like I don't want that to also infect my enjoyment of the hobby. So again, a lot of this just comes back to, focusing on what I want from the hobby and what I want to get out of it, and tailoring sort of my time spent in the hobby a little bit more to that, rather than thinking too much about, because we have a YouTube channel, or because if someone asks about this game, I want to have an opinion on, so I have to go buy it to be able to play it once or twice. I just don't want to have that feeling at least for a little while. And the other thing is just the way that I buy games is I'm constantly, I'm subscribed to a couple of different online retailers. I get updates of when new games come into stock, or certain items that are on my wish list get restocked. I'm keeping track of sales. I track kind of trends with prices for certain games. So if I see a game where it's the cheapest I've ever seen it before, even if I know I'm not going to play it within the next year, if I think, hey, this game is either going to go out of print, or this is the best price I've ever seen it, even though it's going to sit on my shelf for 2 years, I'll buy it now, because I would be a fool to wait 2 years and then pay double, or then I can't get the game anymore. So, but what that means, so even though I think I've done a great job over the past however many years in terms of the money I've spent, I look back on certain games and go, yep, I've never seen that game for as cheap ever again. I'm really glad I got that when I did. Or I have all these games now that are out of print that I got a copy because I suspected it'd be hard to find. And that's fine. I'm happy that I did that now, but my collection is now at a point where I'm pretty happy with where it is, and I just want to dig into it and then start culling games from there. So now I'm going to move on to some stats about my collection, just to keep you guys informed here. So as of January 1st, or 2023, or as of when I'm filming this video, either way, this is in February now, my total number of games in my own personal collection was 191. That was by my own count. This includes pre-orders. I pre-ordered a few games. They were paid for before January. They just haven't arrived yet. Some of them are going to be arriving very early in the year. But there were just certain titles that I didn't want to arbitrarily kind of hold myself off from getting, just because of this restriction that I'm placing on myself. Again, the whole point isn't that anyways, I don't need to get into the nitty-gritty of that, but I've got Ra, Atiwa, Oranienburger Canal, Findorf, and Caesar's Empire are the 5 games that aren't actually in my personal collection yet, but I own them because I've paid for them. And also, just for anyone who's watching who's not familiar with the channel, we're filming this in Dylan's condo, so that's my cousin who I co-run the channel with. So none of the games you see behind me, none of these are mine. So don't be looking trying to guess what I'm going to be getting rid of, because these don't belong to me. So as of January 1st, 2023, I had 70 unplayed games out of 191. So you do the math, it's a bit over a third, obviously. So meaning that if I were to look at it, basically I'm trying to set up goals for the year. How am I going to get through? I want to try and play all of my unplayed games this year. It's pretty ambitious. I know it's maybe not entirely realistic. I might be left with some at the end, but I'm trying to map out kind of when in the year I think I'm going to be playing certain games, and trying to really, really make a priority to read these rule books and make sure that these get played as much as possible. So if I was going to stick to that, it would average out to 5.8333 games per month, so just under 6 new games per month. And I will say January was a very successful month. I played 8 new games off the shelf. So I played Planet Unknown, The Guild of Merchant Explorers, First Rat, Dice Realms, Le Havre, Dungeons, Dice in Danger, Wormholes, and Heat Pedal to the Metal. So I've got 62 games left, and as of now it's February 4th when we're filming this, so I've got 11 months left to get through 62 games. Just quickly, I'll mention some of the ones. First off, here are some of the unplayed ones that have been here the longest. So these are games that I've had at least 2 or 3 years, and just for whatever reason haven't gotten to the table. Car Wars, Decrypto, Flotilla, Admirals, Rossio, Rap Gods, Scapegoat, Legacy of Dragonholt, Obsession, In the Hall of the Mountain King. There's just 10. I think those are the oldest ones I've had. I don't want to be touching on each one in detail or anything like that, but the ones that I'm most eager to play that I want to share, and the reason I bring these up is because these are some that you can maybe expect to see on the channel. If we don't get around to covering them this year, some of these might fall into the next year, just because, we want to get a sufficient number of plays as well. It's not just play it once and talk about it on the channel, but the ones that I'm most eager to try that I have not yet are Fields of Arl, Heaven and Ale, Barrage, The Transcontinental, Crisis, The Siege of Rundar, Taj Mahal, Through the Desert, Decrypto, Caper Europe, The King is Dead, Brian Boru, Guards of Atlantis 2, El Grande, Great Western Trail Argentina, The King's Dilemma, Paint the Roses, Legacy of Dragonholt, Flotilla, Obsession, Scout, Concordia, Fresh Fish, Free Ride, Legacy Gears of Time, Village, Oret Labora, Ricochet Robots, Kalis 1303, In the Hall of the Mountain King. There's plenty of others, but those are the ones that have been at the top of my list. Obviously, that's a lot of games to sort of be at the top of the list. But so my goals for the year and kind of rules now is what I want to talk about. So not only do I want to play through every single Unplayed game if possible, but I'm hoping to play through them at least twice if possible. It's not a requirement, but and it depends on the game. Anything else, basically, I'm going to be trying to get rid of a bunch of games throughout the year and size down my collection too. I'm not allowed, and I've never done this before. I've never gotten rid of a game without having played it. And the reason for that is that it's honoring almost my past self. Like if I thought at one point that this game was worth buying, I would be doing a disservice to myself from whatever a year ago, 2 years ago, by saying, no, they had it, Carlo in 2011 had it all, or 2021 or whatever, had it all wrong. Like, I'm not going to like this game. Why did I think I would back then? Not to say that you shouldn't get rid of games if you haven't played them, because if you're not going to play them, you shouldn't feel forced or required, but I genuinely do want to try all these games. So I am going to make a point to play them all. Some of them I might play once and know right away I'm just going to move on from, but either way, I will not allow myself to cull anything that I've not played at least once. So I've set goals in sort of three ranges. One is the very bare minimum. So let's say worst case scenario, let's say this was the year of my life where I did the least gaming. Let's say I had family emergencies come up and all this kind of stuff and I just didn't have much time for gaming. Still, bare minimum, I should be able to get my collection below 150 games. And again, I'm at 191, so it should be easy to get rid of, 42 games to get below 150. So that's the bare minimum no matter what. And this number of 191 is before the 8 that I'm talking about getting rid of today. So after this, I guess I'll be down to 183. The next goal, which is my main goal and the kind of realistic one, this is kind of the one that I'm really going for, is I kind of floated between 120 and 125. And the reason, part of it is that like a while ago, I kind of decided that if I was going to go over 100 games, that 120 is kind of 125 is really, I didn't want to really go over that amount. And the other thing is just that I think that ends up being about a third, I guess, right? If I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it's about a third of the games. If I cut below 125, I've got rid of 60 some games or whatnot. So I think that's a pretty reasonable goal. And I think, I think I'll be able to meet that. But who knows? It's on camera now. And if I don't, you can give me a hard time about it at the end of the year. I'm going to do a couple more of these videos throughout the year. So, and then my ambitious goal, which I realize it fully is very ambitious, I don't know if I'll be able to do this, would be to get it under 100. So into double digits. So that would be basically cutting my collection in half, which that is incredibly ambitious. I really don't think that's going to happen. But I sometimes take time off work in the summer and whatnot, so might have some extra time on my hands. And a lot of this is going to come down to I got to sort of make a what's it called? Like almost like a request, a plead for action, a plead for help to some of my friends and people in my game group that like, this is going to be the year where I'm going to be showing you a lot of new games, and that's going to be my priority, is like trying to get as many of these games played so that in the future we can all, play again more of these, the games that we love, and not having to just again, I don't want to be adding new games to my shelf. Play what's there, see what's there, before kind of venturing back into that discovery phase again. So it feels nice already to have kind of unplugged from the whole looking at games looking at which games are on sale, whatever. It's just like, no, anytime doing some of the games, it's either reading rule books, playing games, whatnot. I don't have to worry about what's coming out. We're still going to keep track, and I should just add a quick caveat that this doesn't apply to Dylan and Braden. They're going to still be buying games for their personal collections, and we'll still be buying games with our collective money from our whether it's YouTube revenue or Patreon funds. There are certain games we're still going to buy that we want to cover on the channel. Those just won't end up in my collection as games that I'm going to own, or we're going to get games still sent to us like review copies. So we are still going to have newer games on the channel and that sort of thing. This is just a personal thing with my own collection of games that I own myself. So I think that's pretty much it. If at the end of the year, I still have any unplayed games, like even if it's 1 or 2 or 7 or whatever, if I have any unplayed games left, or I haven't met my culling goals, like let's say I still have 165 games left or whatever, then January 1st of 2024, this continues. This continues at least until I've played all the unplayed games and at least met the goal of 150, but ideally below that 120 or 125 mark. So I'm going to hold myself to that. And basically throughout the year, I'm going to try and do one of these curating my collection videos probably every 2 or 3 months would be my guess. So you'll probably see another 3, 4, 5 of these throughout the year. And in those, I'll be obviously talking about not only which games I've gotten rid of, but I can just update you on the numbers. How many are left? How's my progress going? Am I on pace or not. So far, obviously, I'm more than on pace because I played 8 new games last month, which is over the average of 6 that I need. So yeah, I'm feeling good about that. But otherwise, I think I'll leave it at that for now in terms of what my sort of collection goals are for the year. I'm curious to hear if any of you are doing something similar. I started thinking about this back in September, I think it was, and I started buying a bunch of new games to kind of stock up. Ones from especially 2022 that I knew I wanted to cover on the channel and whatnot. And I feel like I've seen either in our Discord channel or YouTube comments, some people have said, oh, I'm going to stop buying games for a while. So I feel like maybe there's a common sentiment among some gamers. I don't know if it's the fact that people are tired of buying a lot of games and then getting rid of a lot of games, or realizing, oh, maybe I didn't need that one. It would have been good enough to try. And I think just in general, as a hobby, if we're all buying fewer games and playing our favorites more and everything, it's just going to improve the quality of the hobby and the quality of games. Because if publishers are selling fewer quantities of their lesser good games, maybe instead of making 6 games a year, they release 2 or 3 per year instead, but they polish those more. And so maybe we get fewer games, but the quality of those games is all better, instead of companies saying, well, if one game doesn't land, we will release 5 more to see if one of those lands. And it feels like a lot of these publishers, there's 2 directions. You see some of those publishers that publish tons of games in a year, and they all feel, or a lot of them feel like they're underdeveloped. And then you see the opposite end of like a publisher, just as one example, something like Days of Wonder, which has kind of gone back to publishing like 1 or 2 games per year. And you see the kind of reception a game like Heat Pedal to the Metal is getting right now because of how much care and attention has clearly gone into one specific game. And I feel like overall, if we can move more towards that, it's better for everyone. And we have a YouTube channel, and we don't want to come across as that we're just always telling people to go buy the brand new games. So anyways, I'll leave it at that. Now let's talk about the 8 games I'm getting rid of. Some of these I'm going to be running through pretty quickly because some of them I've covered on the channel in some type of review format fairly recently, and others I haven't. So some of them I'll spend a little more time on than others, but otherwise, let's get right into it with, let's start with the smallest box here. That is A Gentle Rain. So this is a little, what does it say exactly? Contemplative, or contemplative, I always forget if there's one correct way to pronounce it, or both are acceptable, solo or cooperative game to clear your mind. So this is designed by Kevin Wilson. I took a chance on this a couple years ago, or maybe it was a year and a half ago or so, just because I was doing a decent amount of solo gaming, and it seemed like something that I could either, again, play on my own. It says it's cooperative, something I thought, oh, maybe I can play with my wife sometimes. Very simple little tile laying game. And I had seen it described by some people as almost more of an activity than a game, which I don't really like that. I don't want to get too into the nitty gritty of what distinguishes an activity from a game and win conditions and all that kind of stuff. I do think that's a bit unfair though, because it definitely is a game. There's a set of rules. Keeps track of your points. You can do well or do poorly and that kind of stuff. But it's basically just you shuffle up these tiles, and they have different colors of flower petals on different sides of them, and you're flipping over a tile and trying to line up with other similar sides to match them up. And if you're matching up tiles of these flowers, you get these little blossom tokens that go on the board that kind of represent that you've met a goal. And you're basically just flipping through this deck. It's very much supposed to be, like a meditative, calming, kind of, again, clear your mind type of game. And that's, I think, the presentation, the artwork, the simple rules, like, these are the rules. It says, take a deep breath and relax. And there's basically just that, and then a little thing on the back here. Like, it's super simple. You could give this to someone who's never played a game in their life, and they could figure this out in a couple minutes and just play it as a little activity. It takes about 15, 20 minutes, maybe even 10 minutes. So my time with it was fine. It was all right. And I think for what it's trying to do, it succeeds very well. And I think there's some people who are going to love this sort of thing. There's some people who, if you have like a really stressful job and you like games, and you sometimes find yourself with these 10 or 15 minutes, and you like something that you can just do either in silence or maybe with like a podcast playing or something like that, or listening to music, I feel like this is something that a lot of people would enjoy. And I've enjoyed it. For me though, there's not enough game or enough, after playing 3 or 4 times, I enjoyed it each of those times, but if I'm sitting around at home, or even if I'm traveling somewhere and I'm taking solo game, like if I'm traveling, I'm going to bring Sprawlopolis instead. It's just a more rewarding, more engaging, more replayable game, and it also fits in your wallet, like it's smaller. And then if I want, like, I don't know when I personally would play this. Like if I'm at home and I want something that's this mindless, that has this few kind of decisions to make, I'm probably just going to do something different instead, like read a book, or maybe I'll play a video game, or like go do something outside. But if I'm going to sit down and play a solo game, I usually just want something more than this. So again, totally does what it's set out to do, fine. And if you're looking for that type of relaxing game, or maybe a gift for someone who doesn't play a lot of games who wants something like this, this could definitely be a good choice. But I'll be moving on from that. That is A Gentle Rain. Okay, next up we've got, let's talk about Castle Party. So this is a 2 to 4 player flip and write game that I covered recently in an Own It, Play It, or Skip It video. Actually, our most recent one from just, I think, a couple weeks ago. So you can go, or by the time you see this video, it might be a few weeks before that. But either way, you can go check that out if you want to find out my full thoughts. I did say in that video it was a skip it. The reason being that there are a lot of sort of roll and write or flip and write games out there, and as it is, it's not my favorite genre. I like having a few in my collection. I play them once in a while, especially with my wife, or like there's a couple of other friends of mine who we play some roll and writes sometimes, or you go to the cabin or lazy weekend kind of thing. Like I do like to play them once in a while, but I don't need upwards of like 10 in my collection. And as it is, I think I'm pretty close to that. I have Welcome to, like the original, then I have Welcome to the Moon. I've got the Isle of Cats Explore and Draw, which I haven't even tried yet. I've got That's Pretty Clever, which I really, really like. Which other ones am I forgetting? There's whatever. There's I feel like there's like at least one or two others there that I just already know I like more. And after playing this a few times, it's fine, it's decent, but the fact that it is kind of encouraging you to be mean and keep track of what's going on your opponent's sheets because you're taking turns around the table playing cards that together the shapes of the cards get put together to make a shape, and then that shape is going to be the shape that everyone has to place on their sheet. So you're all collectively having some small ounce of control over what everyone else is going to be taking, but it ends up not really amounting to much in terms of like for what that requires of you to watch your opponents and plan and play a card. It might not even work out the way you did, and even if it did, it's not really satisfying to be just watching other people's sheets when you're just doing like, at least for me, like a roll and write or flip and write game. It kind of gives you, I mentioned in the review, it kind of does a similar thing that cartographers did, but cartographers, you at least give the sheet to someone else and let them just kind of write on it, rather than me having to look at other players' sheets across the table and then look at my cards and my sheet and then look at theirs, and like it just slows the game down too much for what should be a quick playing game. But it's a real shame because I feel like if they had just taken that aspect of the game out, if there was some other way, either a random deck of cards that just determines the shape that everyone places, or if it was done in a quicker or more just efficient way or a cleaner way that didn't slow the game down or muddy it into being like trying to give this like added level of player interaction that I don't think it needed. Like I think I would have enjoyed the game more without that, but there isn't even a way to house rule that because you have to use these cards to create the shape. You can't just say, oh, I'll use these other cards. It's not like in Tiny Town where they give you the cave variant or that deck of cards you can flip and say, oh, we'll just see what we generate every round. Oh, there's a brick, there's a wheat. This doesn't even have that option. So if you really like roll and writes and flip and writes a lot, it's definitely worth at least trying. But I just don't know. Yeah, again, there's too many others that I think are just better. But it does at least a couple novel things that I do think are interesting and worth seeing if you like this type of thing. So yeah, that is Castle Party from Devere Games. Next up, we are going to talk about, let's do Abandon All Artichokes. So this one I also talked about in an Own It, Play It, Skip It video, actually the same one as Castle Party. And this is one I felt a little more torn on. When I initially bought the game, I was pretty confident. Same with Castle Party and A Gentle Rain, I should say. Going back to what I mentioned earlier in the video. All these games I bought knowing, hey, I'd like to try these. I'd like to probably cover them on the channel at some point, but I don't think these will stay in my collection forever. And surely enough, I was right. I did expect Abandon All Artichokes to last longer, and the reason why it's leaving, and I mentioned this in the Own It, Play It, Skip It video, and I did call it a Play It, to be fair. It's ahead of a Skip It for Castle Party because there's a lot of, sorry, maybe not a lot, but there are a few things in here that are very interesting and are very different from the way other games are done because it's sort of deck building, but it's really deck destruction, where every player starts with a deck of these 10 artichoke cards. They're useless, they don't have abilities on them, they don't do anything. And the way you win the game is at the end of your turn, when you've finished playing and discarding cards, you draw back up to 5 cards. First player to end their turn by drawing 5 cards and not having a single artichoke in their hand wins the game. It's the only way you can win. And so you can either add a whole bunch of cards into your deck so that the kind of artichokes get drowned out or outnumbered a lot. You can try and remove a lot of them from your deck, so you have a very thinned out, efficient deck, and maybe you're hoping to draw, and you're basically drawing these vegetable cards that have abilities on them to either swap cards or remove artichokes from your hand or take something from a discard pile or put something on top of your deck. There's just little ways to manipulate the game state. You're gaining a new card from the market row every turn, and you're kind of just going around the table doing this. I think it works. It definitely works better with more players. Like ideally with 4 players, it's still pretty good with 3. With 2, it felt a bit flat for me because of all the cards that come into play where it says pick an opponent, or you and someone do this, or you and an opponent do this, and then it's 2 players, it's always the same person. And just generally speaking, these types of games usually are better with multiple players around the table rather than just like when it's like a small box game that has a decent amount of luck and this kind of like cutesy artwork. It reminds me a lot of Sushi Go actually, and it is from Game Right. It's the same company. It's also packaged in a tin. It's a card game or whatever. Sushi Go is obviously drafting and set collection, whereas this is deck destruction. So very different in that sense. But I think the reason why I'm moving on from this is that I thought that the way this would potentially live on in my collection would be if I played it with like younger people or people who were more casual gamers and they really liked it. And so far, every time I've shown it to either friends or family who are maybe not as into gaming as I am, they've enjoyed it somewhat, but they haven't loved it. There's been other games that have hit a lot harder and no one has ever kind of requested for this to come back to the table. And then I also showed it to my nephews a couple months back, and one of them is 9, I believe, and the other one is I think 13. And they kind of enjoyed it, but again, we played many other games, and they seemed to enjoy a lot of the other games we played over the weekend more. And I think part of it was there's a lot of text on the cards too, and they didn't want to sit there reading and whatnot. So I don't know. It's a tough game for me to talk about because first off, it's a first-time designer, Emma Larkins. I admire a lot of the ideas that went into the game. I think almost everyone out there should at least give this game a try. Even if you can't find a physical copy, give it a shot on Board Game Arena, because a lot of people, I think, would buy this and happily have a place for it in your collection. If you have kids, or you play with people who, again, don't maybe play as many games, like I could see a lot of people really liking this. I personally will never turn down a game of it. I just know that the only times it's been played with the physical version in the past 2+ years that I've had it has been when I've been the one to push for it, and there's no point on me having a game in my collection that's not one of my favorite card games. It's still very good, but there's just too many ahead of it for me if I'm going to be the one having to get it to the table and then still maybe looking up going, I kind of wish we were playing like Bonanza instead, or For Sale, or Arboretum, or whatever the card game might be. So great game, worth checking out, but I will be moving on from Abandoned All Artichokes. Okay, next up, we are talking about, this is actually one of the, maybe not super old games in my collection. It's not like one of the first 5 or 10 that I owned, but probably one of the first 15 or 20 games I bought. I've had this one for a good, 7, 8 years or so, at least, maybe more. That is Hero Realms. When I say 7 or 8 years, 2016. 7 years. Yeah, I think I got it right when it came out, because I'd been playing, there was originally Star Realms. White Wizard Games has now changed to Wise Wizard Games. They've rebranded since. But yeah, there was Star Realms, which is obviously the sci-fi space-themed one, and then they came out with Hero Realms. I got this right away. I much prefer the kind of fantasy setting and just the idea of having champions or creatures or whatever. I think they're called champions rather than bases in space, but this is a very simple, straightforward, quick-playing deck-building game. It's technically 2 to 4 players, but I will say right now, I never really enjoyed playing it with 3 or 4. I tried it a couple times, and to me, I just put it on my shelf with the 2-player only games because I didn't want someone to say, hey, that plays 3 players, can we try that? It ends up being with 3 players, it's either, or 4 even, is that because all you're doing is you're getting cards, putting them into your deck, but you each start with 50 life, and you're trying to deplete all of your opponent's life. So first, last person standing wins, basically. So in a 3 or 4 player game, if someone gets to 0, they're just eliminated and they have to be out of the game and watch while the other players play. But if you're playing to win, which again you should be, then technically if you have an opportunity, one of your opponents is at 7 life, and you have an opportunity to maybe get them out of the game, that's probably the better play than trying to attack your opponent who's at 50, because the opponent at 7 might spend turns healing or getting defenses up, and now they might get back into the game. So when they're weak, you want to kind of knock them out of there. But I don't play small 30-minute whatever deck building games to play with player elimination. I don't want to be eliminated from a game like that and then be sitting watching my friends battle it out, and I don't want other people sitting watching other people battle out. But then the only way to avoid that is we tried a house rule once playing with 3 or 4 where you always have to attack the player with the high, or your opponent that has the highest health left. But that game took well over an hour because, again, everyone kept healing and getting defenses up, and you're always only attacking the strong players. So to me, it just doesn't work with 3 or 4 players. Keep in mind, there's tons of expansions and there's like a campaign mode and all this, so I haven't tried any of that stuff out. So it could be that the game works better with more, but otherwise it's strictly a 2-player game for me, and I've just found that I haven't played it in a few years now. I do like the game quite a bit, but I'll say right now, my wife doesn't like playing the game because she likes 2-player games, she likes getting the player interaction and all that, but there's something about the fact that you're just basically trying to like murder each other, like it's all like knives instead of like daggers. You just stab your opponent and kill each other, whatever. Something kind of off-putting to my wife while playing that, which I don't hold that against her. And either way, like it's not one of my favorite games anymore. Like I used to love playing this all the time, but there's just too many deck builders that I prefer playing, too many small box card games that I prefer playing. And the big reason, normally I would be keeping this, but at least 2 of my brothers-in-law, maybe even someone else in my family. Basically, I know 2 people at least very close to me who both own Star Realms. One of them actually has one of them has Hero Realms with a bunch of expansions. The other one has the Star Realms like deluxe box. So I don't need to own Hero Realms here and just having it on my shelf, people asking about it and whatnot. So it's a great game and it still holds up well. And if you're looking to introduce other people into deck building games and you need a starting point before getting something more complex, or you haven't played a deck builder and you want to start, this is pretty much the ideal starting point. Is like something like this. Star Realms or Ascension is probably going to be your best first deck building game to play. So yeah, that is Hero Realms, solid game, and I still have the app. I'll probably play the app a bunch and stuff. It's a great game, just physical version. It's competing with too many other games in terms of, if I'm going to sit down and play a 2-player card battling game, there's just too many other ones that are more likely to get to the table ahead of it. Next up, we've got It's a Wonderful World. So this is another one. This was actually 3 for 3 from that same Own It, Play It, or Skip It video. This was another Play It, and I, along with All Artichokes, this is, of the 3 that were in that video, Castle Party, All Artichokes, and this is definitely the best game of the 3. Well, yeah, I would say this is definitely the best one, the one I've enjoyed most. It's a 1 to 5 player drafting game. It's got some set collection, I guess, depending how you look at it, but basic idea is the game plays over 4 rounds. You get dealt a hand of cards, pick one, pass the rest to your opponent, pick one, pass the rest to your opponent, etc. You do that until you've drafted your whole hand of cards. But unlike in most drafting games like in Sushi Go or Seven Wonders where the cards just automatically get played in front of you, in this game at the end of the drafting phase, every player has I believe it's called the construction phase, where you're deciding which of these cards are you actually going to try to build because you need resources of different types, or which ones am I going to recycle, so to basically get a resource to use for the cards that I'm building instead. So let's say you finish your draft and you've got 7 cards. You might put 4 in your construction zone, basically meaning you can't use the abilities yet, you're not getting any rewards from them, but they're under construction to be, built throughout the game, and then you might recycle your other 3 cards and take those resources and maybe put them on these ones. And then there's like a production phase at the end of the round where, based on which cards you have and your starting Empire card, you'll produce resources that'll again help you get more cards and stuff throughout the game. So, and that's usually the most interesting decision, is usually in that construction part where you're trying to decide what to do with those 7 cards, because you have your starting card that maybe tells you you get 2 points at the end of the game for every blue card you've built, or that you get a certain number of points for every one of these tokens, these, what are they called? It's not commanders, bureaucrats, something. I'm forgetting the word now, but there's these tokens you can get that are bonus tokens throughout the game that correspond to, you usually get these when you've produced the most of a resource in a round, or certain cards give them as well. So you're usually playing to your starting Empire ability, and I mentioned this, and I won't talk about it too much more because I went pretty in-depth in the Own It, Play It, Skip It video, but ultimately what it came down to is I enjoyed my first 5-6 plays quite a bit, but I could tell from the first few that the game didn't have quite enough. It was a little too cleaned up, a little too streamlined. It felt like all the edges were kind of sanded off, and it felt like it was very pleasant and satisfying. The actual engine building part and that decision, again, of which cards to keep or which to recycle, that's the best part of the game. That's the key core of the game. But the later the game goes on and you have your strategy established, the less interesting the decisions got to me. Because if I now have, 3 cards on one card on the board says you get 3 points for every blue card. This one's 2 points for every blue card. This one's 1 point for every blue card. And I already have a few blue cards. Well, obviously, for the last round, I'm just going to try and take as many blue cards as I can as long as I can complete them. So I might have those last 7 turns of pick a card and pass might be pretty automatic. Like, why would I take this green card that I can't build and that does nothing for my strategy? Of course, sometimes you might have to think, if my opponent takes it, they could get more points. But again, when you're playing a game with multiple players, am I going to hate draft one player if I have 3 other opponents? No. So the higher the player count, the less important the hate drafting becomes, or less of an impact it can have on the game too. So it just felt like at every player count I played it at, it felt like it was missing something. It just felt came up just a little bit short. So the fact that it's on Board Game Arena, I'll be happy to play it again sort of any day anyone wants to try it. It's a very quick playing game, easy to teach, easy to pick up, and it's one that I think there are a lot of people out there will get enjoyment from playing this a good 5 to 10 times. I just don't think it has a lot of legs long term, but I will say there is at least one expansion, I think just one so far, and a few people have told me that the expansion might have changed my opinion, or that does kind of really step the game up. So if you liked the system and you kind of wanted more out of it, it might be worth checking out the expansion. And again, it is a great game, and especially if you're just looking to see what else is out there for drafting games and sort of engine building, it is satisfying to see that progression. It plays very quickly. It's just, there's only so much enjoyment you can get out of a game like this, I think, sort of 5 to 10 plays. So that is It's a Wonderful World, which will be leaving my collection. Okay, we've got 3 more here. So we'll start off with Undaunted North Africa. So this is co-designed by David Thompson and Trevor Benjamin, published by Osprey Games. This is another one that I covered in a previous, maybe 4 or 5 months ago, Own It, Played, or Skip It video. And this was, I think I said play it for this one, sort of on the higher end. It was almost into Own It, but for me, and I think for a lot of people, this is going to be an Own It game. And there's a few, I was very close to keeping this. I might end up regretting getting rid of it, but I don't think so. It started with Undaunted Normandy, then there's North Africa. And then just this past year, they released Undaunted Stalingrad, which is like a massive box. It's like $140 or something. I think it expands the player count, includes some different rules. There's more scenarios, campaign, like there's all kinds of stuff in that one. And if I am ever going to get back into the series, Stalingrad would be the version that I would go for. I mean, pending any other, I think they're also doing, what was it, Undaunted? Was it Battle of Britain, or am I thinking of a different game? Up in the skies, fighting up in the air, maybe? Maybe I'm thinking of a different game. Anyways, basically it's a 2-player only deck building war game, and it's played asymmetrically in North Africa. It's the Italians versus the what is it called, the something desert forces. And basically you'll pick a scenario. There's I think 11 scenarios in the box. It'll tell you these tiles to take out, set up a map, and then you're going to have an objective. Sometimes the objectives could be just either like kill all your enemies, or it could be demolish these important sites with your demolition team, or drive your vehicle to this other site somewhere, or whatever. There's different objectives that can come into play, and you either win by, again, either defeating your opponent's army entirely, killing off all their units, or by achieving your objective. So the scenarios are different. You see different units, like your I guess battalion, depending on the scenario, you'll have different units available. Sometimes you only have 2 or 3 different units you can use. The cards represent the soldiers, but you have, let's say you have a machine gunner or a rifleman. You're going to have, let's say, 5 rifleman cards in there. That corresponds to basically saying that your rifleman can take 5 gunshots, kind of thing. It's not that you have 5 riflemen. You're going to have 1 rifleman figure on the map, but every time that they take a shot, they get, like, your opponent successfully hits them with an attack, you're going to remove one of those cards either from your hand or your discard pile or your deck. And basically, once you've removed all of those, let's say you get down to your last rifleman card, you're searching through your deck, and then you take that last one out, that means that unit is dead, and then you'll remove it from the map. So you're adding more of these cards or removing them from your deck to basically, like, if I want to get the rifleman cards to come up more so that I have more turns to play rifleman cards and use that unit more and move them around, take advantage of their abilities, versus maybe I let my demolitionist sit and I only have 1 or 2 cards in my deck, or maybe I'm buying a new ability or a new type of battalion unit that can go in there that can help me in some other way. This game introduced vehicles. There's all kinds of interesting stuff. I really enjoyed my time with this game, and as a deck builder, it does a lot of cool stuff that I haven't seen in other games. There's even just the thing with the Fog of War cards that you can buy with your scouts that puts Fog of War into your opponent's deck. So it's sort of the equivalent of like throwing off a smoke screen or like a smoke bomb or smoke grenade, and they can't see you. So it's like muddying up your opponent's deck. There's just a lot of cool stuff. I like that the dice rolling is very minimal. It's just sort of down to combat. You figure out quickly what do I need to beat that or to hit that unit, but also I think it's anytime you roll a 0, it's automatically a hit. And so you can take these risks. You can be on the back foot and you can say, well, I'm at range, I'm going to have to hit a really high dice value, but it's really my only shot. And sometimes it pays off, and it kind of simulates that real world feeling. Like, war is unpredictable, nothing is certain. Just because you're looking down the barrel of a gun and your crosshair lines up doesn't mean when you pull that trigger, you're for sure going to hit that person, right? Take into account the wind and how far away are they? Is the bullet going to dip? Like, these things feel like they come into play, and I've never been a person to be a fan of war games in the past, but I've really enjoyed playing this. The reason it's leaving my collection is that with each new person I teach the game to, there's a bit of that learning curve, and we start on the first scenario, we learn the game, and we usually don't end up playing more than maybe a second round. I've shown this to now 3 or 4 people, and I think we've played the first scenario or 2 with a few of them, and one person we played 3 scenarios or 4 scenarios, but it's been like over 6 months now, and it's just one of those things. This goes back to when I talked about why I got rid of Unmatched, Cobble, and Fog in one of my earlier Curating My Collection videos. A lot of these 2-player head-to-head games are ones that you really want to play over and over with the same person and really dig into and have this be kind of a regular game. And that, Unmatched, this, and the games I'm going to talk about in a moment almost fall into an unfortunate spot for me where I'm just not going to play it enough. I'm going to go a while without playing it. I'm going to forget some of the rules. Even setting up the scenarios, the tiles can sometimes take a while. I would love to play through the campaign of this with someone, but again, I just don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. So I'm trying to be realistic about it. Excellent game. Of all the games I'm talking about in this video, this is probably the best one and the one I would most highly recommend. Even if you don't like war games, you just really like deck building, you have to give this a shot and see what it does different from a deck building standpoint, because even as someone who didn't like war games or doesn't normally, I'm really happy I got to play this. And if someone else buys it from me, someone in my friend group, whatever, I'll hand it off to someone. I would happily play this with anyone any day. Awesome game. Undaunted North Africa. And the last 2 here, this is just going to be a 2-parter. I'm just going to put them both on screen at the same time. If you follow the channel, you will know that I did a standalone video reviewing both these games very recently, and that is, of course, Imperium Classics and Imperium Legends. And this is another, unfortunately, one from Osprey Games. These ones, in fact, however, are co-designed by Nigel Buckle and David Turtzi. I guess the Osprey 2-player game model maybe just isn't for me and where I'm at in my life currently as a gamer, and the fact that I co-run a YouTube channel, right? Like, we're playing a lot of games. Some of these games, like Undaunted, like this, I might not have the time to dive into as much as I wanted, Games like Undaunted, games like this, games like Unmatched, which I just mentioned, are games that if I only had a collection of like 10 games or 15 games or something like that, or I went to live in another country for a year and I was only going to bring a few games, like, those games would be at the top of my list of games to bring and dive into with the same person for a year. Like, what you get in this box is an incredible amount of value, both like in terms of the money you're spending, what you're getting, but also the replay value, how much time and enjoyment you're going to get out of these types of games. So these systems, what Osprey is doing is they're giving you something that basically says, I don't need to own other games. As long as I have this and maybe a couple others, I can get so much out of this. But if you're not playing those games enough, they're basically not worth having. So I won't get too into the nitty-gritty because I did a very in-depth review of these games, but as I mentioned in the review, basically there's too much overhead, there's too much managing things, there's too many things that are, even after getting familiar with the game and starting to internalize all the rules, and even after I feel like I've gotten over the hump, it feels like now there's a new hump, or it feels like I'm still not playing it as efficiently as I'd like or as quickly. And even if I were to get quicker and more efficient, just the design of the game feels like it is a longer game than I would like for what is mostly a heads down deck building game that, even if you were to play it above the solo player count, doesn't really have a lot of player interaction. And so a long setup, long teardown, takes a minimum probably hour and a half to 2 hours, including the setup, to play. It's just a bit of a tough sell to live in my collection if it's not something I'm going to play very often, because if I go 2 or 3 months without playing it, which I've done already since I bought it, I'll forget some of the rules, and then that kind of barrier is just it's too much of a barrier for me to want to get back into. It'd be different if this was a game that I thought maybe this would be a top 10 game of all time, maybe it's worth it. I love the game, and if I could just get rid of all the other things that kind of bog it down, I could maybe see it being a top 50 game for me, or probably top 40, 50, somewhere in there. But it's never going to be like, even if you got rid of all the things I don't like, the best parts about it would still not be a top 10 or 20 game for me. So ultimately, it's just not worth the amount of time it takes. But yeah, Civilization deck building game, some of the most ambitious, like one of the most ambitious projects I've seen someone tackle. if you are the type of person who doesn't, have a lot of games in your collection, or you want something to really dive into, you have maybe a dedicated game room where you can keep something set up and just swap out decks and play different matchup, and you want to do that for like weeks or months at a time, then you really can't go wrong with these games as long as you're ready to put in the kind of work necessary to sort of get over the hump. Yeah, fantastic games, and I might end up one day getting Imperium Horizons, which is the new one that's coming out later this year. Or as I said in my review, if they made a digital version, I would buy that in a second, and I would play so much of that. But just in terms of the physical copies, I just can't do it. That is Imperium Classics and Legends. And again, if you want to know more about those, go check out my in-depth review I did about that fairly recently. So that's it. Those are 8 games I'm getting rid of. That is it for now. I've got plenty of others that I'm on the cusp of. I'm sure I'll have hopefully another 8 or 10 at least by the next video. Hoping to do another one of these probably by April or May kind of range, but let me know what you think. I'm curious to hear your thoughts first off about the first part of the video as well, my sort of no-buy challenge for the year. Have you considered doing something else either for this year? Have you done something in the past? How did it work out? Like, I'm curious to hear. Let me know what your thoughts are or experiences if you've done a similar thing. Counting on you guys for the support too, again, we will still be featuring all kinds of new games on the channel and stuff, but I think you're also going to see some positive effects of this in terms of some of the content that's going to come from us playing a lot of games more, or games that have sat on our shelf that we've just kind of overlooked over the past couple of years that are very high-profile games. So if there are also any of the ones I mentioned earlier in the video that you would like to see kind of priority in terms of us covering in the channel, let me know, and I'll try and make those priority in terms of what to play first. But otherwise, thank you so much, especially if you stuck through the whole video. But regardless of what you watch, thank you so much for watching as always, and we'll see you next time.